Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another Hit Save podcast. Today, I'm joined here by Clyde Shaffer. Super happy to have you here. Clyde is the creator and the genius behind the GameTank console. So it's really cool to have you here. We've met many times, and we even hosted you a bit over at PAX East earlier this year, where we showcased the Game Tank console to hundreds of people, which was really cool just to show and just show the console, show the games, and have you talk about it to a bunch of people there. So please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, Jonas. Thanks for having me again. I'm Clyde. I'm just a person with a lifelong game development obsession, and this game console thing has basically been my all-consuming hobby for the past few years.
So tell me just a brief, what is the Game Tank console? And then we're going to dig into who you are and why you're building this right now. But what is the Game Tank console? We got a bunch of consoles out there. We got the Xbox, we got the PlayStation, we got the Nintendo Switch. What's the Game Tank?
So the Game Tank it's basically just like another 8-bit console. It's not you see a lot of products that are sort of out there to be sort of like replicating other consoles, let you play existing old games. This isn't about that. This is actually just sort of taking a lot of the problem solving that goes into building a console and designing and just doing it and trying to create something that with like new parts that you can still get, but it's very much subscribes to a lot of like the old ways. You've got cartridges, you've got these 9-pin cartridge ports. It analog video out looks best on a CRT, just like an old Nintendo would.
I love it. I love it. And we're all fans of the old retro consoles here. So seeing a new retro console come onto the market is really interesting, and it's been super fun. I tried a bunch of your games over at PAX East, and I've tried them before as well. It's just super fun to see this creation of yours, so I'm super happy that we're talking about it today. So can you tell me a bit about yourself and how you got into software development, hardware development, and how you got to create the Game Tank?
Yeah, sure. So, software development I've been in for much longer than I've been in hardware development. Basically, since I was a kid. So I was raised by computer people. That would have been like in the sort of the boom of personal computers in the '90s, and both my parents were actually in computer sales and computer training, and so that was a lot of access to reading material about computers and computers to mess around with stuff on. And I was just one of those kids that really liked to just sort of like tinker with everything I get my hands on. And something I realized early on is that tinkering with computers, if you already have the computer, doesn't require money. You can write the raw materials for software are just time, and when you're a kid, you have oodles and oodles of that. That would take me down a path where I would study to ultimately want to be a professional game developer, and have been making games as a hobby, in high school and even earlier than that too, like even elementary school. But I would go to college. I did a game development minor, and I was all set to go work in a studio that was going to, like be a programmer at a game studio that does sort of like outsource work from other bigger studios. And then LucasArts got bought by Disney, and they canceled everything that was in the pipeline everywhere. And I got laid off for the first time before even graduating college.
Oh
Uh,
no.
so so after that, I ended up sort of like bouncing around a little bit, and I ended up just sort of working in the regular software industry, working at various like tech startups just in the New York City area, and even started one with a friend that went for a little bit. And I guess I can say it's technically a success. It did get acquired by somebody else who brought me on and paid me a salary for a while, and then I worked at a little company called Facebook for a bit.
I've heard of them. They were called the Facebook at one point, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's some charm to the. They a little hasty on dropping the there, but uh, yeah, that went until they had a little bit of a reduction this year, and so now I'm working on the game tank essentially full time for the time being.
Very cool. Very cool. So, what inspired you to create this? It's an 8-bit 8-bit console in the
Hmm.
modern times. What inspired you to create it?
So a couple of years ago, I was going to say around like 2017 or 2018 is when I got interested in hardware because I sort of had I played a couple of games by Zachtronics.
Hmm.
Is one of the big ones that inspires people to go down this rabbit hole and sort of
I love his
building
games.
devices. They're great, and for me, I just kind of ran out of Zachtronics games and started playing them in real life. Uh, and some of the stuff I was interested in, it first started out as I could, like I would get like Arduino modules and I would string them together into stuff. And I was starting to find that this is also around when 3D printing was becoming more popular, and I wanted to
Hmm.
put stuff into custom cases, but it's really hard to fit stuff into custom cases if it's all these separate modules wired together. So I learned PCB design for the purpose of taking a lot of these stuff on modules and putting them on one board, making it more compact. Around that time, I found it interesting to start reading like data sheets of components,
Hmm.
and I stumbled across the data sheet for a 6502, specifically the recent one by WDC, and something about it clicked. It just seemed really friendly. I knew I wanted to play with this thing, and at the same time, I remembered a lot of unanswered questions that I've had like in my head since childhood. If you look at the RCA jacks on the front of a TV, you've got red, white, and yellow. The red and white one's audio. That's straightforward. Voltage goes up and down, and the speaker pumps in and out and presses the air, and the air presses your ear, and you hear it. That's fine. Video was some kind of black magic. I mean, it still kind of is, right? Like you're looking at this thing. It's one signal. It's all laid into one signal. There's no like separate wire to say like, oh, here's where like color information. I mean, there is that. But, that's obviously we're talking like this, RGB S video stuff. You do have that separately, but composite video is kind of a like it's pretty magic. It's a lot of, and it's just stuff that like I didn't get the opportunity as a kid to really have all my questions answered about it, and then years later as an adult I thought, okay, I could take another swing at this and try to figure it out. And so it started as kind of this like thread unifying a bunch of projects of, oh, wouldn't it be funny if what I strung all my projects together into was just a new game console.
Hmm.
And because this is sort of how you arrive at that, this is what sort of informs the architecture of these things, is you just start with what do you have, what are the building blocks you have, how do they stack together, and then what sort of things are feasible to come out of that.
That's amazing. You were in kind of a, perfect storm of uh, PCBs getting easier to procure, thanks to a bunch of PCB manufacturers opening up shop essentially and making it easier for people like you and me to actually order PCBs and create them. Fantastic open source tools to draw the PCB diagrams and everything, and then 3D printing, which just exploded a couple of years ago. I had a 3D printer. I had two at one point, and it's just so much fun. So it was kind of a perfect storm for you there, where you were learning all this stuff, and you really wanted you had a mission of creating something where you could utilize all of this new knowledge.
Yep. Uh, in fact, what actually, like, I think a thing that actually sort of helped trigger that, with especially with the 3D printing aspect, is that at that time I had my 3D printer for a while. Like I actually had a 3D printer I got maybe like 20, I don't know, 13, 2014, like a really
That was early.
that was pretty early on, and it was
Yeah.
pretty expensive. At the time, I was at my first professional software engineering job, and I done some stuff with it and printed a few things, but it was still kind of onerous. Like, if I was going to print something, I'd have to really want to print something. That was still when you had to level every corner individually. You're working with ABS plastic, and that's very temperamental. The room has to be the right temperature, and of course I didn't have a MakerBot. I had one of the cheaper ones. I had one made of wood,
Oh,
flat,
nice.
flat flash forge, and so that was like going fine for a while. And then eventually, at some point, I had some friends over, just hanging out, playing video games late at night, and this guy is dude's like a brother to me, and I couldn't even be mad at him for it, because especially now that it's kind of kickstarted everything else. Somebody said something. He laughed so hard. He backed into the piano bench I had the 3D printer sitting on and knocked it over, and it was pretty much just demolished.
Oh no.
And so that just sort of, I was like, yeah, that's on me for putting it there. Don't worry about it, dude. I quickly sort of collect it into a bag and set it aside for a while. And I realized at that point, like some other printers had come out by then, and so I bought. My initial plan was to buy a really cheap new printer, use it to print parts to rebuild the old printer. And while I succeeded in that, I feel like I did not use that printer a whole lot more because the printers I got to help repair it they cost half as much and were 10 times better.
Yep, yep. They evolved really quickly.
They did. And so that from that's sort of like kick started my spiraling of like going from doing 1 to 3 like 1 or 2 3D prints a month to sometimes just doing like 10 a week.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely spent more time tinkering with my 3D printer than actually printing something, which
Hmm.
is why I eventually gave up on it because it was just a time consuming hobby. But it was super fun. Just the 3D printing of it is just amazing. I showed my daughter how it worked, and yeah, it's just super fun. One day I'll get back into it when I have some more time. So, how did this then translate into you creating the game tank? You said that it is similar in spirit to fantasy consoles like the Pico 8 and the TIC 80. For people who don't know those, can you explain those for a little bit?
So the Pico 8 and the TIC 80 are game consoles essentially that exist only as emulators. They are defined specifically by like software specific like limitations. Essentially, is like you have a certain resolution. I think they also define a certain memory size and a certain set of features that you can access. There's not some sort of like secret mode of like the features you get are the features you get. If you can draw a sprite to a screen, maybe they'll give you rotation, maybe they'll give you some other stuff. But it's designed to evoke the idea that you're working on a system with these constraints. However, that also means because they're not actually defined by any particular hardware physical constraints, you couldn't really meaningfully make a hardware version of a Pico 8 one to one. Because what you'd end up with is going to be not one to one. You're going to be making something that either doesn't play all Pico 8 games, or it could play all Pico 8 games and probably a lot of other things too. Like the Pico 8 is great for what it is. The fact that it has that built-in Lua interpreter means that people can just program stuff for it really easily. It's a simpler language. It's something that's sort of self-hosted. It's you could do all your creative stuff in within the scope that like within your Pico 8 context. It's actually something I'd love to experiment with for the GameTank as well. Being able to make GameTank games like from entirely within the GameTank itself. If you were to make hardware of the Pico 8, you'd need some way to have a Lua interpreter. You'd need some way to do these graphics operations that it supports. Some of which are kind of powerful. It says you can do like this resolution and these colors, but then people have used that to write like full Doom clones and sort of like leverage the fact they're running on this powerful host machine to do stuff because the limitations that are specified for the fantasy console are not actually all that restrictive. If you figure out how to do one thing and suddenly you're sort of basically leveraging the full power available of the computer.
That makes sense. So, you said earlier you mentioned that you chose the 6502 processor for this. Um, why did you choose that one?
Sort of at the time I was thinking of like it would be interesting to interface with an 8-bit processor because I liked this idea of having played these Zachtronics and some other games. I think the specific one I had played most recently at that time was MHRD, kind of upon on Microsoft Micro Hard, where you do kind of like hardware design in their custom programming language. And I found that game kind of leaves it's that almost like stops at the most interesting part, which is you've made a CPU. You now understand how to interface with a CPU at the most basic level, and then the game just kind of ends, and you're just like, wait, I can't make like peripherals for this thing. A bunch of things for it to communicate with a bigger overarching system. I mean, for all I know, they could have added that later. I haven't played the game in a long time since playing switching to the real hardware. But that's the sort of the mode I was in. So I wanted to interface with something where it's like, oh, okay, you have your address bus and your data bus, and you want to do stuff with that. And that kind of came down to the 6502 and the Z80. So the Z80 is also a popular one. He was using the Game Boy and he used a lot of other systems. And what it sort of boiled down to was that I was able to more easily find community documentation for the 6502.
Ah,
I
yeah,
was
that
able to
helps.
find a very active forum. I think the forums I was finding for Z80 at the time, or at least the more like known ones, were less active. A lot of the posts were very old, and there's just like less buzz. I think now there's actually, I think I've been at some point a resurgence of Z80 stuff, and that's cool. I'm gonna play with that at some point if for a different project. But the 6502 just had a lot of really easy as inroads, and it kind of like felt compatible with what I already knew, especially since I'd previously done a little bit of NES tinkering.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So you talked about limitations before with the Pico 8 and how it's pretty much limited by the hardware that backs it, not necessarily the fantasy console itself. But one of the constraint that you have right now with the GameTank, which is very interesting to me, you have a 128 times 100 pixel display with how many colors? Is it 200 unique colors?
It's 200. It's yeah, because there's 256 possible values.
Hmm.
But because of the way that it's defined it's defined by hue, saturation, and brightness. And so if saturation is 0, then all the hues, the hue part doesn't matter. So those overlap. It's
Ah,
like repeated copies of grayscale.
that's very cool. Have you noticed any issues when it comes to creating games with that type of constraint?
I have found that if I'm trying to prototype something like really quickly just to throw stuff together and just sort of grab stuff, like I'll scroll through stuff on the assets on itch.io to see like what's what might look good in this size. I'd find that 128 is definitely like smaller than most people think of as being small.
Yeah.
I'll grab stuff where it's like oh, here's a set of small characters I made, and I'll bring them into the game tank's resolution. It'll just be like occupying half the screen.
Even though you have those constraints, and I told you this when I first tried the Game Tank as well, it looks amazing. It almost looks 16-bit at times. It is really well polished when it comes to actually displaying the games, the animations, and everything. It's really, really cool to see. So when I did some research in preparation of this interview here, I had no idea that that was a constraint that you had because it looks so damn good, to be honest. It looks really, really cool. So when creating this and creating the games, how do you plan for the constraints, the color constraints, but then still create such really amazing looking games?
Yeah, so I think the sort of secret to why the game tank looks better than it sounds like it should is that it what it doesn't have in like horizontal like space resolution, it sort of trades for temporal resolution. The fact that it can do animations with a lot of frames,
Hmm.
because and sort of this is actually because the resolution is so small, the hardware is able to redraw the screen relatively quickly. And this also means that if you have sprite sheets, there's a sprite sort of memory that is compared to the size of the screen. It's like 32 times bigger.
Oh wow.
And so the way the game tank's graphics work is that you have this sort of off-screen memory that it grabs all your frames of animation from like on demand and stitches everything together. And and the thing that does this is it's actually a separate from the CPU. It's like a little parallel. It's almost like a primitive GPU, but it can redraw the whole screen 3 times over and still keep 60 FPS. And so what this means is that for my current game, I'm actually working with a really talented sprite artist who happens to have a like I'm kind of blessed to find that he had a really compatible art style with the
Hmm.
resolution. It's almost reminiscent of I think the old Prince of Persia, where
Yep.
they rotoscoped it. Even though the graphic itself, the pixels are very big, because you have a lot of unique frames of animation and you're able to update it more. You can have like instead of like a 4 frame or 2 frame run cycle, you can have like a whole 8 frame, 10 frame run cycle, where you can just have a lot of little details showing up in I think what they call that subpixel animation.
That was the one thing that really struck me when trying out some of the games. The fluidity of the motion of the characters is just stellar. It reminded me of Prince of Persia, but also Flashback, the old game for Amiga, Super Nintendo, bunch of them. So same thing there. Extremely fluid motion animation. So that's really, really cool to see. When it comes to the parts of the game tank, so it's an open source console. Everything is open source. The PCBs, the schematics, the 3D prints, everything is open source because you wanted to have this from entirely new stock parts, essentially. So why was that important to you?
There was something that I, in doing this project, noted that I was going to be sort of, a, doing a lot of engineering, but b, sort of creating a lot of prototypes for this thing. I felt this sort of sense of responsibility of like taking this, usually with, if I'm used to making software, and if you make a lot of software, it's just, it only exists in your hard drive. It's not sort of like taking up space. It's not using up real materials. And I felt this kind of sense of responsibility for having taking these designs and commissioning them to be made in like physical, taking up space and resources and some, labor somewhere, to be created. And when I succeeded in creating the console, I wanted it to be something that wasn't just a one-off.
Hmm.
And this sort of like ties back into how I like to take like multiple projects and string them together to be a continuing kind of path. And I figured, rather than have the path stop at, I've created a console and gotten a platformer to run on it, and then I'll just go on to something else. I could sort of see where it goes, see what I could do to make it so that other people could get their hands on it, figure out what might make it compelling for other people to play with, see if other people come up with like interesting new techniques, or just, see if I can, or if I can just make somebody smile.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, I big open source aficionado, obviously. So I really, really appreciate all the hard work that you're doing there. What are some of the most interesting conversations you've had around the game tank with regards to it being open source and having its own community in that way? What have you seen from other people who want to improve on it?
Yeah, the I think I'm hearing, especially now, like more in the most recent, period of like, I brought this to a hacker conference, and I got a lot of people who are very hardware hackery, very interested in it, and they have all sort of different ideas and suggestions. Somebody that's actually goes to the hackerspace, that he saw this and he looked at all the expansion ports and the pinouts and stuff I have available for it, and immediately was like, all right, I think it'd be really cool to make some, some hardware like a game tank, like essentially the 32X
Hmm.
for the game tank, which is
Yep.
definitely something that I wanted to foster. If I, if not did it, doing it myself, then have leave the door open for somebody to do that, where you can just make something that slots in and adds all these capabilities and does some other stuff. And so now, like a few years into the project, created some games for it, and definitely run into like what are its most meaningful limitations, and then what would be interesting to expand on that and give it sort of more abilities, or even maybe even let it sort of expand its role. Right now, like by itself, it's a game console, but there, could feasibly be something that slots in at the top and gives you like a little port to plug in a mouse and keyboard. Lets it act as a full-on 8-bit or PC. I think actually this guy was talking about a 16-bit essentially add-on, where the
Oh
idea
wow.
would be it would be itself contain a 16-bit computer, slots into the game tank, and uses the game tank as sort of its graphics card.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. Want to be very clear as well to anyone who's listening or watching this. When I talk about constraints, I see that as a good thing because it means that you can be very creative within the guardrails. And we recently had an interview with Ben Gelter, who is a creator of a bunch of fantastic Game Boy games, and he talked about this as well. The constraints of both GB Studio that he started using years ago, and the constraints within the application, and then the constraints of the hardware, meant that he could be very creative within those constraints. And I've definitely seen that with the games that I've played already. So it's super super cool. From that community as well, you've hosted multiple game jams. What have you seen from those? And what has the feedback kind of been?
Yeah, the so let's see, I'm about to have the fifth game jam. It's a shorter one than the previous ones, because I'm actually tying that back into something that we can, we'll probably get back around to later, the expos that I'm going to. But I've had four so far, and there's been some definitely very interesting work come out of that. Two different, I guess, with outrun style, like driving
Oh,
type thing, or I guess like maybe like pole position style, like that very, old Atari kind of like behind the car view where it's drawing the road line at a time. Somebody has also just created a full blown 3D renderer for the game tank.
Really?
They figured out how to get C++ to work for it. They figured out how to adapt algorithms for drawing arbitrary polygons, and it runs at multiple frames per second, which is which
That's impressive.
I would have been impressed with 1 frame per second, but they actually managed like 3 or 4.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So you said racing games like Outrun, Pole Position, stuff like that. Have you seen any platformers or anything else?
Platformers, I think, is has mostly been my own stuff so far, making platformers. A lot of the stuff coming into the jams have been essentially like shmups.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So we have one actually like pretty well fleshed out one from the same jam as the 3D renderer. So the theme of that jam was fish.
Okay.
I just put out I wanted it to be something that people would not have to overthink. Just sort of like just something take and go with it. It could be. I actually sort of did my own entry into that jam. It was just the game Go Fish.
Nice.
And so so more literal than others. The 3D renderer was actually an aquarium. They made a polygon fish swimming around a cube, and so the shmup that somebody else made was a aquatic themed shmup where you're going to side. It's basically Gradius, but you're a fish.
Very cool. Very cool.
And other ones I think have also been. I think somebody did a sort of a one person had made two different sort of like shooting gallery type games where it's like you move a cursor around, hit targets as they come up. They made another one where you sort of like walk around. I think they said it was a remake of an Atari game, Shotgun, I
Hmm.
think it was called, and they had a sort of a version of that. And then there's the guy in Japan who's been porting his 20 games that he made to every 8-bit system he can find.
Oh, wow.
And so there's a pretty good mix there. There are a couple platformers in there as well as some kind of puzzle thing, and then like more shmups.
I love it. I love it. I got to try those out.
I just added them to the games page as well on the online.
Fantastic. And speaking of online, we'll mention this at the end as well. But if anyone wants to read more about the Game Tank, where should they go?
They should go to GameTank.zone, which is a real thing that websites can end in.
Fantastic. I love all the new TLDs. It's really fun. There's one for Dot Boston as well here. There's a bunch. So as you were creating the game tank, obviously you had multiple iterations of it,
So many.
and I and I know you have some of the physical iterations of it near you. Do you want to showcase any of them?
Yeah, I'd like to hold up gently to hear it because it's fragile. So I have this. I guess you could call this V1 of the game tank, where it was very far from being console shaped, and this is essentially like a motherboard style construction where I've got these separate cards. The big one on the back is the graphics card. One side is generating the video signal, and the other side is that thing I talked about that copies sprites onto the screen in the background. We have the old version of the sound card, and we have this little much simpler card on here that's just for reading Genesis controllers, and later the controllers I made that are still basically Genesis clones, but a nice little connector there. One of the other features is that I have covered all the board in memes.
Oh, nice.
So I'll describe it for anyone who's just listening. I have the one where it's the two of them pointing at the cat, as this is the motherboard.
I love it.
That's got Smudge not liking his salad here, and the sound card. If we can pull this off gently, it might be.
Be careful.
Yeah. If it doesn't come off, I'm gonna not. Oh, there we go. That's actually one of the reasons I went off of this kind of design is how hard it was to remove and put these ports. But I've got sort of a big mouth Billy Bass on the back of the sound card. Put this down over here before I break it further.
Smart.
And then jumping ahead to version 3, which is the first one that the version 2 was not really a whole lot to show. It's basically the same thing but flat.
Hmm.
Turns out when all of your boards are like vertical and stacked like together, you can't debug them very easily. It's good to have access to probe it with voltmeters and stuff.
That makes sense.
This is the first one that was actually console shaped, and this one actually does still work. And so I call this the V3, but in terms of console shaped game tanks, this is sort of unit 0, and this is what it looked like in the end, where it's all these through hole components that takes me a sleepless weekend to put together just one.
It's gorgeous.
And then finally, this is the current iteration where I had been using PCBWay to produce the boards, and instead of making one in a weekend, I could get the boards, and then what I do is I would get the boards, I would put them into the plastic case myself, and also wire up the buttons, and there's some other construction intricacies that go on there, but I would reliably get like 10 done in a week
Oh, that's great.
if I'm preparing for an event, and that's also like about my personal limit where my testing starts to suffer.
Hmm.
And then people, they'll buy it at a convention and they'll be like, "Hey, so I'm having this problem," and I'll just have this realization sink in and be like, and I was like, "Oh, all the ones from this week are going to do that, aren't they?" And then they do.
So one thing that's really cool, and we haven't really touched on this, if you look at the game tank, you have a little slot there for a physical cartridge as well. So the games are on physical cartridges. So how would you go about testing and programming towards the game tank?
Yeah, so I've got, in addition to the hardware being open source, of course, all the tooling for it is open source. I've got a C based SDK that uses an existing open source project called CC65, which a lot of people have used for programming for like Commodore 64. I've sort of built a kit around that with some libraries and configuration files to point that onto the game tank. In addition, I also created a bunch of scripts that would automate stuff like converting your sprites from bitmaps. The way that it gets onto the cartridge is I've created another custom piece of hardware that actually is decidedly more modern. You plug it in by USB and you plug the cartridge into the top,
Mm.
and I have a program for it that you then use that to load your ROMs into the cartridge, and that's pretty fast now. But it can still like if you're using if you're filling the entire cartridge, it can take like a couple minutes. So I also have an emulator. I thought in the beginning as almost as sort of like a challenge, or like when I made it, it was like, okay, let's see how much of a game I can make for the game tank before I develop the emulator. And the answer was no. Like I was also at the time when I was still handwriting assembly for it.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of times where you can like typo one thing,
Yeah.
and also at that time I had a earlier version of the hardware of the cartridge flasher, which is essentially just these big chunky EEPROM chips, and those would take like a full 5 minutes. I'd be like, all right, time to test this on the cartridge. Hope it works like it worked in my head.
Hmm.
I'm gonna you go make a sandwich while it flashes.
Yeah, it takes a while to debug things. Then, if it takes 5 minutes to write to it every time, and then you want to test it, and then it fails after a little while, and then you go back to the drawing board. So yeah, I totally get that. Totally get that. So the emulator obviously is open source as well, and can be found on GameTank.zone. So recently, you revealed kind of a pre-campaign page on crowd supply for the game tank as well.
Yes.
So, what's the motivation behind it, and what's the end goal of it? Do you want to increase supply? What do you want to? What are your success criteria essentially for the crowd supply campaign?
My hope with partnering with Crowd Supply for this is I can get more game tanks out there for people to play with. I think that I'm from the sales that I've been having in person at expos and conferences. I can see that there's definitely like I'm hitting into an appetite that other people share, and it's not just this not just a me thing, and that there could be something to actually sort of like perpetuate making these and distributing them. But there's a sort of a cycle that needs to be broken into, which is the game tank would get more people to get it if it had more games.
Hmm.
but it would get people more making more games for it if there were more game tanks out there, if to make it more attractive of a platform. And so Crowd Supply, they're a subsidiary of Mouser, which is of course like I buy a lot of my parts from them.
Fantastic, fantastic
They
supply.
can negotiate. I could like a get deals on parts. B, they can put me in touch with contract manufacturers who even have sort of like discounts for working with Crowd Supply projects. My last big shipment of game tanks that I got from PCBWay was in December, and now it's quite a bit harder or quite a bit more expensive, I'd say, to bring things in if they're made in China. That's why the manufacturer I'm getting quotes from now is in Croatia, which is a bit cheaper of a rate. Even if they do themselves get some stuff from China into there that gets remanufactured, fine by me. The goal then is essentially is to get more game tanks in more people's hands, and then get it into the hands of people who are going to be really excited about it and want to play these games that people in the community have been making, which would then in turn draw more people into the game making community for the console.
I think it's a really interesting console because it has this physicality to it. It is a physical console. It's not a fantasy console. It's not an emulator. It's a physical console with a physical controller, and you plug it into your TV. You plug in the game, and you can play it. And I think having something that is that physical, which is and still completely open sourced and tinker friendly, I think will absolutely draw in the right type of people that want to support such a thing, support a an upcoming, or I
Yeah.
mean, it already exists, but support an upcoming console like that. And then, as you said, you have emulators. It's easier to program and debug the games and the tools that you create for it. I absolutely love all of this, and I would love to have one back over with my game consoles as well. I think my daughter would get a kick out of it, just to see something like that. I think it's really cool. As a tinkerer myself, I would love to see if I can come up with something. I'm not a hardware developer, absolutely not. So I can't help there. But maybe I can create some games for it, and that would be really, really cool.
that
Or
would.
so yeah, I would absolutely love to support you there on the crowd supply. So yeah, that's my spiel. I love stuff like this. I love tinkering, and I love just creating things. So yeah, it's so cool to see. I'm just amazed by what you have created already. The community, the games, the hardware, the entire console is there. So yeah, it's just really, really cool. So if the crowd supply is successful, the campaign is successful, you will get more consoles out in the world. What do you already said you want more games, you want more people to play them, and more people to create more games, and it kind of snowballs from there. How do you see the ecosystem evolving? You mentioned some hardware, potential hardware upgrades, and things like that. Um, what are some things that you hope would happen?
Yeah, so definitely, something that's always on any tinkerer's mind is fantasizing about the next project or what you would do on the next thing, or you find some other like component or thing you want to work with. And I think one of the things that I think about a lot is what can I do that would augment the game tank without invalidating all the ones that people have already gotten into. And that's sort of why there's been more exciting talk about doing it 32x style rather than a complete replacement, which is that it's something that rather than replaces, it builds upon it. On the theme of getting more games out there, one of the things I'd like to do is to create a sort of online service where people can share their games really
Mm,
easily, almost like a dedicated like Game Tank itch.io sort of situation, but something where it has the online emulator,
hmm.
maybe even, and this is sort of inspired by my experience with my Game Tank merch store, which actually I was sort of had up as my e-commerce prototype before I was selling them online. And it's that drop ship print on demand, kind of business where people you put something up, you put a design, and then somebody else buys it, and then a third group is actually going to on demand, like put that onto a shirt and ship it to the person who bought it. You don't keep stock. And I think something that could be interesting would be I'd like to be able to uh, give people a route to distribute their homebrews on cartridge physically, sort of dropship style, where they can make that more accessible to people, so that like rather than each of these people individually having, and there's certainly a lot of fun in sitting there flashing cartridges. It's a very romantic, software Wild West kind of vision. I'm even now suddenly remembering the times in like grade school where I was sharing a game I made by like putting floppy disk after floppy disk in the machine and waiting for it to write. But that's something that like we could probably streamline that process and say like, oh, put like you share your game, and if you want, you have the ROM up there. You can add label art if you want. I guess you could say that the cartridge is a different color, or just use the gray, and then just have it available for someone to buy, and probably even like give you most of the revenue from that. Basically just your custom. Name the price you want to sell it at plus the hardware price, and then there we go.
I like that. I like that. That's really cool. Looking back at the development, how long have you been working on the GameTank since version 0 that you showed here?
That would be 2019 is what I sort of call like the start year.
So, looking back, what advice would you give to someone who would like to do something like this? Create a retro console from the ground up. What mistakes have you learned that someone could learn from?
So I'd say the biggest mistake, and it's one that's sort of like it's like it is one that sort of like almost sometimes has me reconsider like very plans at a very big scale, and that sort of comes to, and it's also something that like you kind of do have to deal with if you work on a hardware project for a long enough time, especially when there's like a global pandemic in the middle messing up the supply chain.
True.
uh, there were multiple times in the Game Tank's history where I would have to, and I think I mentioned when I was showing off that V0 kind of prototype, and I said the old version of the sound card, and that's because shortly after that, a critical component of that, which was for mixing the sound channels into one output, was it just went it's gone, just extinct,
Oh,
end
wow.
of life, and that wasn't a part that you can get anymore, and there wasn't really a drop in equivalent, and so I was faced with either redesign it a little bit and use a different component, or just take a wildly different approach to sound that doesn't depend on that. And what I actually ended up coming up with was essentially stick a second 6502 in there, and its job is just to spin and make sound. And so I guess the advice, what it comes back to is giving the advice is that if you design around a component and that component is like super critical to your application, try to pick things that maybe have more than one source. And in fact, I'm still sort of dealing with this problem, and this is sort of one of the bigger obstacles I'm dealing with even now, is the fact that I have these big the video RAM that I'm using is this it's a memory chip, and the thing that's special about it is that it sort of acts like it has the interface of two memory chips, but it's one memory. So what I have is that I have the system side that writes to pixels, and you draw stuff on the screen, and it just talks to that memory chip as if it's the only thing talking to it. Meanwhile, the video generating circuit is also reading that as if it's the only thing connected.
Mm.
And it takes a lot of headache around designing the system, and it means that you can access any part of it you want at any time. And that part went from a $40 part, which I probably should have questioned at the time, to a $60 to a $70 part, with a several month lead time.
Wow.
And so that one is sort of the one that adds a little asterisk to parts you can buy today, which you can.
Hmm.
And in fact, you can still buy them from the official supplier. But what I'm trying to figure out a way to do this reliably is you could buy them for $70 from, I think it's Renaissance is who sells them, or you could go on AliExpress or eBay and get them for like $10. And I've actually had a pretty good rate. Like basically the part where that evens out is if you buy seven of them on eBay and only one works, versus
Hmm.
buying one for the price of seven that's going to work because it's new, or whatever, quote unquote new stock that they have sitting in a warehouse somewhere. But I've actually found that like 90% of the eBay ones, they just work for that purpose. The video hardware does not actually require like the fastest possible speed out of it. So even if it's like underlabeled a little bit, you're
Hmm.
still going to be mostly fine. And so like it actually does turn out to be like out of every like 20 or 30 chips, one of them just like doesn't work for some reason, and that's more of like a they dropped it or something.
This is amazing. As I said before, Clyde, I am so happy to have gotten to know you and gotten to meet you and played the game tank, played your games. It's been a really cool experience just to see everything. And this interview has been really eye opening as well, just learning about the process of the game tank and the process of you figuring out things, how they work together, and then essentially creating your own 8-bit console. So this has been so much fun. So thank you so much for coming on here. Where can we find more information? We want to plug the game tank, your crowd supply, your Twitch. Give us all the URLs.
All right, so it's going to be. I keep it pretty simple. I played the subdomain game, so we've got GameTank.zone is going to take you to the main website. If you want to see the developer documentation, that's wiki.gametank.zone. YouTube.gametank.zone will take you to the YouTube channel. GameTank.zone/crowd supply, no space or dash or anything, will shortcut you to the crowd supply pre-campaign page. And then finally, if you want to come into the community and say hi and ask about stuff, we've got discord.gametank.zone, which will redirect you to that Discord invite link.
Fantastic. And you're going to be at some shows as well. You're going to be at the Portland.
Portland Retro Gaming Expo. That's going to be next week.
So that's going to be super cool. And you're going to showcase some of the Game Jam games there as well.
Yep, that's a theme I'd like to bring to more game jams. Is I schedule a show and say like, hey, who wants to show a game at the the booth?
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and we're obviously going to be at PAX East again next year. So if you want to have the game tank there, let me know. I'd be happy to host you again.
So as it turns out, I also have put in for a booth at PAX East next year.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You're going to have your own booth. That's going to be amazing.
So yeah, I'll certainly have to find time to come and say hi, and who knows, maybe we can be neighbors.
Well, we'll make sure to usher a ton of people your way. Absolutely. That's going to be so cool. Uh, Thank you again, Clyde. This has been lovely. And yeah, I wish you all the best and good luck with the crowd supply campaign. I'll obviously be there. It's going to be, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for everyone listening and watching, thank you all and see you next time. Have a good one.